Welcome to Moonlit Insomniac. Tonight, we travel to ancient Greece, where the hills shimmer silver beneath the olive trees, and the air hums with quiet wisdom. Here, a young scribe named Lysander meets Thaleia, a woman whose calm presence feels older than the land itself, and together they uncover the gentle, hidden truths. This is not just a story, it's an exhale. So find a comfortable place, let the world grow distant, and allow yourself to wander among the olive groves of ancient Greece, where every leaf holds light, and by the end, perhaps, you'll find a smile waiting where your thoughts used to be. Chapter 1. The Whispering Hills of Attica. The sun had just begun to lean westward, spilling gold over the slopes of Attica. Across the undulating hills, olive trees shimmered as if dusted with silver. Their leaves caught the light in quiet waves, 1,000 mirrors of the afternoon sky. Between the trunks, the earth breathed in shades of ochre and pale green, and the air hung fragrant with wild thyme. Lysander walked the narrow path that wound toward the village, his sandals brushing over chalky soil. He had come from the city, from Athens, where marble and marble mines rose high and proud. Yet already the countryside was softening him. The hum of bees, the distant laughter of farmers calling to their oxen, the rhythm of the land itself. All of it seemed to move to a slower pulse, a forgotten tempo. He carried a small satchel of parchment rolls, sealed ink, and a brass stylus, the tools of his trade. The council had sent him to record the customs of the villages, their songs, their harvest rituals, their ways of living with the land. It was meant to be simple work, a matter of observation, but as he drew nearer to the olive groves, he felt an inexplicable stirring, as though something unseen had been waiting for him among the trees. The path turned downward into a shallow valley, where a stream glimmered like a thread of glass. Beyond it lay the village, whitewashed stone houses nestled close, smoke rising from clay chimneys, and behind them, hills blanketed in olives that seemed to stretch into eternity. Lysander paused. He felt the stillness of the moment, the way the light seemed to hum softly against his skin. When he entered the village, the air was filled with the faint, resinous scent of oil. A few children ran past, barefoot, holding handfuls of green olives. Their laughter bounced off the walls. Women stood near wide baskets, sorting the fruit, their hands shining in the sun. Every movement seemed purposeful yet unhurried, as if the day itself obeyed a rhythm older than time. A man sitting beneath an arbor of vines looked up as Lysander approached. He was broad-shouldered, his beard touched with grey. "You've come for the harvest?" he asked in a voice rich with ease. "I have," said Lysander. "From Athens. I'm here to observe and write of your customs." The man smiled, eyes bright beneath his weathered brow. "Then you'll need to speak with Thaleia," he said. "She knows the trees better than any of us." He gestured toward the grove that bordered the village. There, in the dappled light, a young woman was gathering fallen olives from the ground. Her movements were unhurried, almost graceful, the folds of her linen dress brushing lightly over the soil. A strand of dark hair had slipped free from her braid, glinting in the sunlight as she reached forward. Lysander watched for a moment before approaching. Something in her presence, the quiet surety of her motions, the patience with which she touched each olive, made the noise of his thoughts fall away. When she looked up, her eyes were the color of the earth after rain. "You must be the scribe," she said, her tone gentle but steady. "I am," he replied, inclining his head slightly. "And you must be Thaleia." She nodded, rising to her feet and brushing her palms on her dress. "They send someone new each year," she said, "but the trees always teach the same lesson. It is only the listeners who change." Lysander smiled faintly, uncertain whether she was teasing him or speaking some quiet truth. "Then perhaps you'll show me what the trees have to say." Thaleia studied him for a moment, not suspiciously, but as though weighing how much he could hear. "Come," she said finally, and turned toward the heart of the grove. The two walked in silence for a while, the earth soft beneath their feet. The trees grew older and thicker the deeper they went, their trunks gnarled like the faces of ancient storytellers. Sunlight sifted through the branches, moving in ripples across the ground. Occasionally a faint breeze passed, carrying the delicate rustle of leaves. "These trees," Thaleia said quietly, "were planted when my grandmother was a child, and her grandmother before her. The roots are deep. They hold more than water. Some say they remember." "Remember?" Lysander asked, intrigued. She nodded, stooping to touch the rough bark of one. "The old ones say that the olives remember the hands that have cared for them. They remember laughter, sorrow, the prayers whispered at harvest. Perhaps they remember even what we forget." He wrote down her words, though they felt too alive for ink. "Do you believe that?" he asked. Thaleia's smile was slow, wistful. "Belief doesn't matter. The trees do not need it. They are what they are." They walked on until the grove opened into a small clearing. A single olive press stood there, a round stone basin with a wooden lever and a great circular weight. It looked as ancient as the hills themselves. Beside it, an amphora waited, half filled with the first press of the season. The oil shimmered within, pale green gold, catching fragments of the afternoon sun. Thaleia dipped her fingers into the amphora and lifted them, letting the droplets fall back in a thin ribbon. "This," she said softly, "is the beginning. The first oil of the year. The elders say it carries the voice of the land." Lysander leaned closer. The surface of the oil was so clear that he could see his reflection bending upon it, distant, softened, almost dreamlike. "And what does the land say this year?" he asked. Thaleia tilted her head as if listening. "That we've taken much," she murmured, "but still it gives. That peace is a fragile harvest, and we must press it gently." Her words lingered between them like the scent of the trees, subtle, pervasive, impossible to ignore. The sun was beginning to lower behind the ridge when Thaleia led him back toward the village. Shadows stretched long between the trunks, and the air cooled. In the distance, a shepherd's flute sounded faintly, the notes curling like smoke over the fields. As they reached the edge of the grove, Thaleia stopped and looked toward the horizon, where the sea shimmered in the last of the light. "Do you know," she said, "they say that when Athena and Poseidon contested for the land, the goddess offered this tree, the olive, as her gift. Not power, not storm, not conquest, but peace, nourishment, and light. The people chose her gift, and so Athens was born." Lysander nodded slowly. "A gift that endures," he said. "Only if we remember why it was given," she replied, her voice soft as twilight. For a while they stood there in silence, watching as the hills turned bronze and violet. The air seemed to hum faintly, not from sound, but from the stillness itself, a kind of quiet that felt alive. When they parted, Thaleia said she would show him the pressing at dawn. "That's when the oil speaks loudest," she told him. Lysander returned to the small room the villagers had offered him, its walls whitewashed and bare save for a clay lamp. He set his stylus down but found he could not write. The words he had gathered felt too delicate to trap on parchment, like trying to sketch the shimmer of sunlight on a leaf. Outside his window, the olive groves stretched endlessly beneath the moonlight, the silvery leaves whispering secrets to one another. He thought of Thaleia's words, of the trees remembering, of Athena's gift. And somewhere in the quiet, he sensed that he had not come merely to record customs, but to remember something the world had forgotten. He leaned back, watching the lamp flicker, the air scented faintly with oil and earth. And in that moment, he felt something shift, a stillness deeper than rest, as though he were being slowly folded into the rhythm of the grove itself. The hills exhaled softly. The stars came out one by one, and between their distant lights and the faint rustle of olive leaves, the night began to hum with a peace as old as Greece itself. Chapter 2. The First Press. The first light of dawn came gently, not as a blaze but as a whisper. It slid across the hills of Attica, pale and rose-tinted, brushing the olive leaves until they seemed to glow from within. A thin veil of mist lingered near the stream, catching the morning light like spun glass. Lysander rose before the village had fully woken. The room was cool, the clay lamp extinguished, a faint scent of olive oil still clinging to the air. He ran a hand over the rough parchment on his table, the notes he had tried to write the night before, the thoughts that had refused to be trapped. They felt distant now, as though they belonged to another life. He stepped outside into the stillness. The air smelled of dew and stone and earth. Somewhere nearby, a rooster called, its cry echoing across the grove. The sky was soft, streaked with lavender and gold, and the trees, heavy with olives, seemed half asleep, their leaves trembling in the first breath of wind. Thaleia was already waiting for him at the grove's edge, her hair bound loosely, a woven basket hanging from her arm. She greeted him with a nod and a faint smile, the kind that belonged to those who rose with the sun, not out of duty, but out of rhythm. "You said the oil speaks loudest at dawn," Lysander said as he joined her. She glanced toward the press nestled deeper in the grove. "It does," she said simply, "when the world is quiet enough to listen." They began to walk, their steps soft against the earth. The trees rose around them like silent witnesses, their silver-green crowns catching the morning light. A flock of doves lifted from the branches ahead, their wings stirring the cool air. "The first press," Thaleia said as they walked, "is always sacred. It's not just oil, it's the story of the year. Everything the land has endured, everything it's been given. Too much rain, too little sun, the laughter of the harvesters, the songs sung while the olives were picked. All of it ends up here." Her words lingered in the air, soft but resonant. Lysander watched the way she moved, sure-footed, unhurried, as though she carried some secret understanding that time itself obeyed. When they reached the clearing, the press stood waiting like an ancient altar. The massive circular stone gleamed faintly with oil, its surface worn smooth by generations. A wide wooden beam extended across it, attached to a heavy lever arm weighted by stone blocks. Around the edges, clay amphorae caught the golden trickle of the previous day's pressing. Several villagers had already gathered, men and women of varying ages, their faces lined by sun and years, their hands strong and practiced. Yet there was no noise, no chatter. Only the steady, rhythmic creak of the press as one of the men turned the beam, and the slow, patient drip of oil into the waiting jar. Lysander stood beside Thaleia, the scent of crushed olives rich and earthy in the air. It wasn't just the smell of food, it was life itself, distilled. "Each drop," she said softly, "holds the sun and the rain. It holds every hand that touched the branches." He nodded, watching as the oil flowed in a thin stream, glowing in the dawn light. "And yet it ends the same way each year," he said. "Pressed, stored, consumed. All that life, gone in a season." Thaleia turned to him, her gaze steady. "Not gone," she said. "Shared. The trees give, and we live. When we use the oil to light our lamps, we return that light to the world. When we eat it, we become part of its story. Nothing is lost, Lysander. It just changes form." He studied her face, the calm certainty in her voice, the serenity that seemed to radiate from her like warmth from the earth. "You speak as though the trees have taught you," he said. Thaleia smiled faintly. "Perhaps they have. Or perhaps I've just listened long enough to hear what most forget." An older woman approached them, her hair streaked with silver, her hands glistening with oil. "Thaleia," she said warmly, "bring our guest closer. Let him see how the first press is blessed." Thaleia nodded and gestured for Lysander to follow. They approached the basin where the first batch of olives was being crushed. The air was thick with the scent of fruit and stone. The woman reached into a clay bowl filled with fresh oil and held it up toward the rising sun. "May this oil carry peace," she murmured. "May it feed, heal, and light the homes of those who receive it. May it remind us that giving is the heart of all things." As she spoke, the villagers bowed their heads. Even the birds seemed to quiet. For a moment, the grove felt alive with reverence, not the reverence of temples or statues, but something older, simpler, the kind that lived in soil and sunlight. When the blessing ended, the older woman dipped her fingers into the bowl and brushed a drop of oil across Lysander's forehead. The gesture startled him, though her touch was light. "You came to write," she said, smiling gently. "But perhaps you also came to remember." He bowed slightly, unsure what to say. Thaleia turned to him, her expression soft. "Now you're part of the grove," she said. "You can't leave without carrying its voice." Lysander looked down at his hands, at the faint sheen of oil left by the ritual. "Then I suppose I'll never leave," he said quietly. Thaleia's eyes met his. "Perhaps that's not such a bad thing." They spent the morning together in the grove. The sun climbed higher, filtering through the leaves, turning the world to liquid gold. The press continued its slow work, the sound of wood and stone blending with the hum of bees. Thaleia showed him how to test the oil's clarity by holding it to the light, how to tell if the fruit had been harvested too early or too late, and how the old men could tell the health of the land just by the taste of a drop on the tongue. Lysander listened, wrote, and watched. But more often he found himself forgetting to write. He caught himself simply watching her, the way her hands moved, the way her voice softened when she spoke of the trees, the quiet light that seemed to follow her wherever she went. At midday they sat beneath a cluster of trees to rest. The villagers had gone back to their homes for food and shade, leaving the grove in near silence. Thaleia set down a small loaf of bread and a clay jug of water between them. "You look as though your thoughts are louder than the birds," she said. Lysander smiled faintly. "I'm trying to understand what makes this place feel different from anywhere I've been. It's not just the trees or the work or the people. It's something else." Thaleia tore the bread in half and handed him a piece. "It's peace," she said, "but not the kind you find in silence. It's the peace that comes when everything is in its place. The trees don't try to be anything but trees. The sun doesn't try to change its path. The oil doesn't question why it gives. Perhaps humans are the only ones who forget who they are." He turned the bread in his hands thoughtfully. "And what are we meant to be?" Thaleia's gaze drifted toward the horizon. "The bridge," she said, "between what grows and what fades, between what gives and what receives. When we remember that, the world remembers us." Her words settled over him like the warmth of sunlight. He thought of the city, of the marble debates, the endless pursuit of knowledge and power, the restless clamor of men who believed wisdom could be found in argument. Here wisdom whispered. It lived in the spaces between words. They ate in quiet companionship, sharing bread and water as though it were a feast. The grove breathed around them, the branches moving with a rhythm that seemed both ancient and alive. When the meal was done, Thaleia rose and brushed the dust from her dress. "The oil must rest before it's stored," she said, "but tonight we'll light the first lamp. You'll see why we call it the lamp of memory." "The lamp of memory?" Lysander asked. She smiled. "You'll understand when you see it." The rest of the day passed slowly, the hours stretching like honey in the heat. Lysander helped where he could, rolling amphorae, sealing lids with wax, recording the names of the families who had contributed their olives to the press. The sun traced its path across the sky, and the grove shifted in color, from gold to amber to rose. By evening, the first oil of the season had been gathered and purified. Thaleia called for the villagers to return to the clearing. One by one they came, carrying small clay lamps. The air had cooled, the sky deepening to violet, the first stars trembling at the horizon. Thaleia stood near the central amphora and dipped a small reed wick into the oil. She lifted it carefully, the flame flickering to life in her hand. "This light," she said, her voice soft yet carrying through the grove, "has been with us since the first gift of Athena. It is the same flame that once lit her temple, the same oil that fed our ancestors through winters and war. It reminds us that what we tend with love endures beyond us." She passed the flame to the next lamp and then another, until the grove began to glow. Dozens of small golden lights floating between the trees. The air shimmered with warmth, and the scent of oil and earth filled the night. Lysander stood among them, the lamp in his hands trembling slightly. The flame's reflection danced in his eyes, and something within him stirred, not thought, not memory, but recognition. He looked at Thaleia across the light-filled grove. She met his gaze, and for a moment the world seemed to still. The lamps flickered between them like a constellation of their own making, each light a reminder that some gifts, peace, presence, remembrance, are eternal. And in that moment, Lysander understood. He had not come to record the customs of others. He had come to learn what it meant to live in harmony with what cannot be written. The oil shimmered, the grove breathed, and the night, vast, timeless, tender, folded around them like a prayer made of light. Chapter 3. Bread, Salt, and Storytelling. The air that evening was warm and still, wrapped in the faint perfume of crushed olives and the cooling earth. The grove had fallen into a hush after the lamp ceremony, but the village beyond had begun to stir again. The hum of voices, the clatter of pots, the low laughter of those who found joy in the simplest rituals of life. Lysander followed Thaleia down the winding path that led back toward the heart of the village. The clay lamps still flickered in the distance behind them, scattered through the grove like stars caught among the branches. Their glow moved with the wind, soft and irregular, as though the night itself were breathing through the trees. The sky had deepened into violet, brushed with the faint shimmer of constellations. A crescent moon hung low over the horizon, and the sound of the sea drifted faintly on the air, a rhythmic whisper, timeless and distant. When they reached the village square, the scene was one of gentle celebration. Wooden tables had been set beneath fig and pomegranate trees, their branches hung with ribbons and oil lamps. The villagers sat in clusters, passing bread, olives, cheese, and bowls of fruit between them. Children darted between the tables, carrying jugs of water or helping to refill clay cups. Lysander paused at the edge of the square, his heart caught between stillness and wonder. "You celebrate every harvest like this?" he asked. Thaleia smiled, adjusting the shawl around her shoulders. "Everyone. It's not for the oil alone, but for what it represents. The end of the work, the proof that we've lived another season together. The gods may bless the trees, but it's our laughter that keeps them growing." Her words carried a quiet rhythm, almost musical. She led him to a table near the edge of the gathering, where an old man was breaking flatbread into pieces and sprinkling it with coarse salt. His hands were steady despite their years, the skin darkened by sun and soil. "Ah, Thaleia," he said, looking up. "You've brought the scribe from Athens." Lysander inclined his head. "And you must be one of the elders." The man chuckled softly. "One of the stories, more like. Sit, both of you." They took their seats beside him. A woman poured them wine from a jug and handed them slices of bread still warm from the hearth. The aroma was simple but intoxicating: grain, salt, olive oil, and fire. Lysander tore off a piece and tasted it. It was unlike the bread of the city, coarser and richer, with the faint sweetness of the land still in it. The elder watched him with amusement. "You're tasting our soil," he said. "Every crumb carries the memory of the ground it grew from. That's why we never eat alone. To eat is to remember we belong to something greater than ourselves." Thaleia nodded in agreement. "That's why we share salt too. It keeps things pure, preserves what should last." The old man leaned back, his gaze sweeping over the tables where the villagers talked and laughed beneath the lamps. "Do they still debate all night in Athens?" he asked Lysander. "Still argue over what is true and what is good?" Lysander smiled faintly. "More than ever. Words have become their own harvest there." The man's laugh was low and deep. "Ah, then you've come to the right place to remember how to listen." He reached for his cup, raised it slightly, and said, "Here we debate differently, with bread and stories." A murmur of agreement rose from those nearby, and soon the conversation faded as one of the women began to speak. Her voice was soft but strong, carrying through the square like a woven thread. She told the story of Athena and Poseidon, how they had once stood upon the Acropolis, each offering a gift to the people of the land. Poseidon struck the earth with his trident, bringing forth a spring of salt water, fierce and wild. But Athena, with gentler hands, planted a seed that grew into the first olive tree, a symbol of peace, endurance, and wisdom. The people, seeing the light in her gift, chose her as their patron. As the woman spoke, the crowd fell into silence. Even the children stilled, their faces lit by the flicker of the lamps. Lysander found himself drawn into the rhythm of her words, as if he were hearing the myth for the first time. When the story ended, Thaleia leaned closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "They say that tree still stands on the hill of Athena's temple. Some claim it never dies, that no matter how many times it's burned or broken, it grows again." "Do you believe that?" he asked. She smiled faintly. "Belief doesn't matter. What matters is that it reminds us what peace looks like, something that survives even after the fire." For a moment they sat in quiet companionship. The world around them felt suspended between earth and sky, as though every sound and movement were part of one vast heartbeat. Then, from another table, an old woman's voice rose, cracked but strong. "Tell him about the first press, Thaleia," she said. "Tell him what your mother used to say." Thaleia's eyes flickered with warmth and memory. "My mother said that when the first oil runs clear, you must dip your fingers in it and touch your heart, to remember that life, too, must be pressed before it gives its light." The old woman nodded approvingly. "Wisdom runs in her family," she said, earning a gentle wave of laughter from the group. Lysander turned his cup between his hands. "Do you ever write these stories down?" he asked. The elder shook his head. "We don't write them because they're not meant to stay still. They live in breath, in gesture, in the soil under our feet. You write words, we live them." The answer struck Lysander deeper than he expected. He had spent years chasing the permanence of ink, the illusion that truth could be contained on parchment. But here, in this village of simple rituals and endless giving, truth was alive, fluid, shared, and luminous. A small child approached their table, carrying a plate of figs and honey. "For the guest," she said solemnly, setting it before Lysander. He smiled, taking one of the figs and splitting it open. The inside glowed with deep purple and gold. "What's your name?" he asked. "Eleni," she said proudly. "Do you know any stories, Eleni?" Thaleia asked. The girl nodded eagerly. "My grandfather says the olives grow because they remember the song of the rain." Thaleia smiled. "And do you believe him?" Eleni shrugged. "I don't know. But I sing when I help pick them, just in case they're listening." The table erupted in gentle laughter, and Lysander felt something bloom quietly within him. Not amusement, but affection. There was a purity here, a rhythm that existed outside the restless striving of men. As the night deepened, the stars brightened, and the air cooled. Someone began to play a lyre, its notes light and crystalline, like water moving over stone. The melody drifted through the square, softening every face it touched. Thaleia rested her elbows on the table, gazing upward. "Do you know what I think?" she said softly. "I think the gods live in the quiet moments, in the pauses between laughter, in the breath we take before we speak, in the space where light meets shadow. That's where truth hides." Lysander looked at her, his thoughts stilling like ripples in a pond. "And what about love?" he asked, the words escaping him before he could stop them. Thaleia's gaze met his, calm and steady. "Love?" she repeated. "Love is when you stop searching for truth and let it find you." The music carried on, weaving around them. Villagers rose to dance, slow, circular movements that echoed the motion of the olive press, the rhythm of the land itself. Lysander and Thaleia watched for a while, their shoulders brushing occasionally as laughter rippled through the air. Eventually, one of the younger men called out, "Come, Thaleia, dance with us." She shook her head, smiling. Not tonight. But the crowd was insistent, clapping their hands until she rose. She turned to Lysander with a glint of amusement. "You'll have to write quickly," she said. "I only dance once a year." He laughed softly, though his chest tightened as he watched her step into the circle. The lamps glowed around her, their flames trembling in rhythm with the music. Her movements were unhurried, graceful, like wind moving through tall grass. The folds of her dress caught the light, and her hair gleamed like dark silk in the lamplight. When she turned, for just an instant, their eyes met again. It was not a gaze of invitation, but recognition. A wordless knowing that some connections need no explanation. The dance ended to gentle applause, and Thaleia returned to her seat, cheeks flushed, eyes shining with quiet joy. "You see," she said lightly, "even the earth remembers how to move." They lingered long after the others had gone, the last embers of the fire glowing softly. The air was thick with the scent of figs and oil, laughter and memory. Lysander's parchment lay untouched beside him. The night had written its own story. At last Thaleia rose, gathering her shawl. "You'll see the lamp again tomorrow," she said. "But tonight remember this, the light is not only in the flame. It's in what it touches." She walked away, her figure dissolving into the shadows of the grove. Lysander sat alone for a while. The stars spread above him like spilled oil across the heavens. He thought of Athens, of the endless halls filled with arguments and pride, and he thought of this village where knowledge came not from books or laws, but from bread, salt, and the simple act of sharing. He realized then that Thaleia was right. Wisdom did not shout. It whispered, and only those who slowed down to listen could ever hear it. He looked down at his hands, still faintly shining from the oil of the blessing, and smiled to himself. The grove had already marked him, and somewhere in its quiet heart he knew the trees were still remembering. Chapter 4. The Lamp of Memory. Morning came with a hush that felt almost sacred. The air was cool, washed clean by a soft mist that still lingered among the olive trees. Birds moved quietly through the branches, their calls muted, as though they too remembered the light from the night before. Lysander woke to the faint sound of footsteps outside his window, the rhythmic shuffle of baskets being carried, the murmur of voices greeting the new day. The scent of bread baking drifted through the air, mingling with the sharp green aroma of crushed olives. He rose slowly, his body still heavy with the warmth of sleep. On the table beside his bed lay his parchment and stylus, untouched since he'd returned from the celebration. The words he had tried to write felt unnecessary now. The night itself had said all that needed saying, in laughter, in silence, in the graceful turn of Thaleia's dance beneath the lamps. He stepped outside into the light. The sun was only just cresting the ridge, spilling gold through the mist. The grove shimmered, not with brilliance, but with quiet life. Dew clung to the leaves like tiny mirrors, and every tree seemed to hum softly with the breath of morning. At the edge of the path stood Thaleia. She was dressed simply, her hair braided loosely, a clay lamp in her hands. The flame flickered within it, though the day was already bright. "You kept it burning," Lysander said, approaching. She smiled faintly. "Always. The lamp of memory must never go out. It carries the flame from last night, and all the nights before it." He studied the small flame, the way it seemed to dance even in the still air. "What do you do with it?" "We return it," she said. "Back to where it began." She started walking, and he followed. They moved through the grove in silence, the branches whispering overhead. The path wound upward toward a small hill, crowned with a single ancient tree, older than any in the valley, its trunk wide and twisted, its roots half exposed like the hands of the earth reaching up to hold it steady. When they reached it, Thaleia knelt at the base of the tree and set the lamp down. The flame quivered, catching the morning light. "This is where the first tree was planted," she said softly. "Not by Athena herself, perhaps, but by those who remembered her gift. Every year, when the first oil is pressed, we bring the flame here, to remind the grove that we have not forgotten." Lysander looked around. The hill offered a view of everything: the village below, the ribbon of the stream, the distant shimmer of the sea. It was a place of stillness, where even the wind seemed to tread lightly. "And if one year you didn't bring it back?" he asked. Thaleia looked up at him. "Then the grove would sleep," she said simply, "and we would forget who we are." Her words lingered, delicate and sure. She reached into a small pouch at her waist and drew out a few olive leaves, placing them gently beside the lamp. Then she whispered a few words, not in Greek, but in a language older, softer, closer to song. Lysander felt something stir within him, a recognition that went beyond meaning. It was as though the earth itself had exhaled through her voice. When she finished, she rose and turned toward him. "Come. There's someone I want you to meet." They descended the hill by a different path, following the line of the stream. The water moved lazily, reflecting the sky like glass. At its edge stood a small stone cottage, shaded by a fig tree. Smoke rose gently from the chimney, curling into the air like a question. An old man sat outside, carving a piece of olive wood with a small blade. His hands were steady, his movements deliberate, as though he had all the time in the world. "Grandfather," Thaleia called softly. The man looked up, and his face broke into a slow smile. "Thaleia," he said, setting the wood aside. His voice was weathered but kind. "And who's this?" "This is Lysander," she said, "the scribe from Athens." The old man nodded thoughtfully. Ah, a man of words. He gestured for them to sit on the stone bench beside him. Words are fine things, if you know when to put them down. Thaleia laughed softly. He's learning. Lysander smiled, bowing his head slightly. She's an excellent teacher. The old man's eyes twinkled. She learned from the trees. They say nothing, and yet they tell everything. He reached for the piece of wood he had been carving. It was the shape of a lamp, small, simple, elegant. The grain of the olive wood glowed faintly in the sunlight. Every year, he said, I carve one for the grove. The wood holds the memory of all it's seen, the wind, the storms, the hands that have tended it. When it burns, the light carries those memories upward. He handed it to Lysander. Here. The lamp of memory is not only for the grove, it's for those who remember how to see. Lysander held the carving carefully, feeling its weight. The surface was smooth, warm to the touch. I don't know if I've earned it, he said. The old man smiled. You don't earn light. You carry it. They spent the rest of the morning with him, listening as he spoke of the seasons, of the way the land changed its voice from month to month. He told them how the first farmers had learned the rhythm of the trees, how they'd discovered that olives harvested in silence gave sweeter oil. When they left, the old man pressed a small pouch of dried leaves into Thaleia's hands. For remembrance, he said, and for peace. Back in the village, the air was filled with quiet labor. Women washed amphorae near the stream, men stacked bundles of firewood. Life had returned to its steady rhythm, but Lysander saw it differently now. Every movement seemed part of a conversation between human and earth, giver and receiver. He spent the afternoon helping Thaleia seal jars of oil. She worked deftly, her hands sure and graceful. Occasionally she would hum a tune under her breath, the same melody, he realized, that the old man had carved into his rhythm while shaping the lamp. When the last jar was sealed, she straightened and wiped her hands. You've done well, she said. I'm learning, he replied, smiling. You're remembering, she corrected gently. Evening came slowly, painting the grove in amber and violet. The villagers gathered again, though this time there was no feast, only the quiet ritual of returning the lamp's light to the homes. Each family carried a small flame from the central lamp to relight their hearth. The entire village shimmered softly, a constellation born of human hands. Thaleia and Lysander walked to the edge of the grove where the first tree stood. The lamp they had placed at its roots still burned steadily, the flame small but unwavering. Every year, Thaleia said, we tell the grove our story. Not so it will remember us, but so we will remember ourselves. Lysander looked at her, the lamplight flickering across her face. And when the oil runs out? She smiled faintly. Then we press again. For a long moment they stood together in silence, watching the flame dance. The stars began to emerge, scattered like seeds across the sky. Somewhere in the distance an owl called softly. I used to think wisdom was something to be gathered, Lysander said quietly. Like olives. Something you could hold in your hands, count, store away. And now? She asked. Now I think it's something you live beside, he said. Something that grows with you, as long as you don't forget to tend it. Thaleia nodded, her gaze lingering on the flame. That's the truth the trees remember. He wanted to say more, to tell her that her presence had become a kind of light itself, that the world seemed clearer through her eyes, but the words refused to form. They were too heavy, too human. Instead, he simply stood beside her, allowing the quiet to say what he could not. The night deepened, cool and tender. The grove seemed to exhale as though settling into peace. Lysander felt it move through him, not as a thought but as a pulse. The same rhythm he had felt when he first arrived, now steady within his own chest. He knew he would leave soon. The council in Athens would expect his writings, his observations. Yet the idea of writing felt almost impossible now. How could he capture something that lived in silence? Thaleia turned toward him, sensing his thoughts. "You can still write," she said softly. "Just not to remember, to remind." He met her gaze. "Remind who?" "Yourself," she said. A breeze passed through the grove, stirring the leaves. The lamp flame wavered but did not go out. In that fragile light, Lysander felt something shift again, a deep, wordless peace. Thaleia picked up the lamp and handed it to him. "Take it," she said. "You'll need it for the road back." He hesitated. "Won't the grove need it?" "The grove remembers," she said. "Now it's your turn." He took the lamp carefully, holding it close. The flame flickered against his chest, warm and alive. As they walked back toward the village, the stars followed like quiet witnesses. The air smelled of oil, earth, and wood smoke. The world seemed to have folded into simplicity, a single breath, a single heartbeat shared between them. When they reached the edge of the grove, Thaleia stopped. "Tomorrow," she said, "you'll go back to Athens." He nodded slowly. "Yes." She looked at him, her expression unreadable but kind. "Don't try to explain it to them. Just live it. Let your life speak." Lysander wanted to answer, but his throat tightened. Instead, he simply nodded, and she seemed to understand. They stood there a while longer, two small figures at the threshold between light and shadow, between remembering and forgetting. Then Thaleia turned and walked back into the grove, her lampless hands brushing the air as if in silent blessing. Lysander remained where he was, holding the flame she had given him. The night pressed close, filled with the quiet pulse of life. He looked toward the sea, where the horizon shimmered faintly under the stars, and felt the soft hum of the olive trees behind him. Somewhere between them, between earth and sky, silence and song, he found the truth he had been seeking. It was not in the words he wrote, nor in the thoughts he had gathered, but in the space between. And as the wind moved through the grove, carrying the scent of oil and light, Lysander finally understood. Some memories are not meant to be kept, only lived. Chapter 5. The Philosopher's Fire. By the next morning the mist had lifted. The hills gleamed under a clear, radiant sky, and the olive leaves shimmered as though dipped in light. The grove seemed brighter, more awake, as if the earth itself had drawn a long, slow breath. Lysander followed the narrow path that curved upward from the village. Thaleia had told him they were going to visit someone. A man who teaches the land as much as he learns from it. Her words intrigued him, though she said little else. The climb was gentle at first, the air filled with the scent of thyme and myrtle. As they ascended, the view widened. The olive fields spread like a green sea below, the whitewashed village resting quietly between them, the distant horizon crowned by the faint glimmer of the Aegean. Thaleia walked ahead with the ease of someone who knew every stone, every turn. She carried a small basket wrapped in linen. The sun caught in her hair, making the strands gleam like burnished bronze. Lysander watched her for a moment before speaking. "Yesterday," he said softly, "your grandfather spoke of the trees as though they were alive, as though they remember." Thaleia smiled, glancing back at him. "They do. But they also forgive. That's what keeps them growing." Her words lingered with him as they continued upward. Soon the path opened into a plateau where the remains of an old temple stood, weathered columns of pale marble, half crumbled, half enduring. Beyond them, a small stone dwelling overlooked the valley, smoke rising faintly from its hearth. An old man sat cross-legged near the doorway, tending a slow fire. His hair was silver white, his skin the color of sunlit clay. Beside him lay a stack of scrolls, weighed down with small stones to keep them from unfurling in the breeze. Thaleia approached with a gentle bow. "Master Dion," she said, her tone both affectionate and respectful. "I've brought a visitor." The philosopher looked up, his eyes as clear as the morning sky. "Ah," he said, his voice calm and deep. "Athens has sent one of its sons to find what cannot be written." Lysander blinked, surprised. "How did you—" The man smiled faintly. "Your hands give you away. Ink stains do not lie." Thaleia laughed softly, setting the basket down beside the fire. "He's come to learn from the grove," she said. "Then he's come to the right place," Dion replied, gesturing for them to sit. "The olive knows more about truth than all the philosophers of the city." They settled beside him. The fire crackled gently, its warmth mingling with the soft scent of herbs that burned within it. Dion reached into the basket and drew out a small loaf of bread and a flask of oil. "Ah," he murmured, "you brought the gift of the grove." Thaleia poured a few drops of oil into a small clay dish and set it near the fire. The sunlight caught the surface, turning it to liquid gold. "Do you see that?" Dion said, nodding toward it. "Light, hidden within darkness. That is the nature of wisdom. The oil carries the sun, but only when pressed." Lysander leaned forward, drawn in despite himself. "You speak as though everything here is a lesson." Dion smiled, his gaze steady. "Everything is a lesson if you are willing to listen to it. But the greatest truth of the olive is patience. The tree grows slowly. It bends, but it does not break. It gives without asking for praise. Tell me, scribe, what grows in Athens?" Lysander hesitated. "Ambition," he said finally. "Words, ideas, arguments." "Ah," Dion said softly. "Noise." Thaleia hid a small smile behind her hand. Dion leaned forward, feeding a few twigs into the flame. "Fire," he said, "is like the mind. It must be tended. Too little air and it dies. Too much and it consumes everything. The same is true of thought. Athens burns itself with its own brilliance." Lysander frowned slightly, though there was no offense in his tone. "And what of you, master? You think deeply, too. Do you not risk the same flame?" The old man's eyes gleamed with quiet amusement. "Ah, but I do not think to prove. I think to remember." Thaleia poured water into a small clay cup and handed it to Lysander. "That's what I told you," she said gently. "The grove remembers." Dion nodded. "She learns quickly, your Thaleia." "Not mine," Lysander said, though his voice softened as he said it. The philosopher smiled, sensing more in the words than was spoken. "No one belongs to anyone here," he said. "That is why we are free." For a while they sat in silence, watching the fire. The flames danced softly, their light reflecting in the pool of oil nearby. A breeze moved through the broken columns, carrying the scent of rosemary and smoke. Dion reached into his pile of scrolls and withdrew one that looked older than the rest. Its edges were frayed, its surface marked with faint writing. "This," he said, "was written by a friend of mine who believed the gods speak not through thunder but through stillness. He said that if one quiets the mind long enough, one can hear the earth thinking." Lysander smiled faintly. "And have you heard it?" Dion's eyes twinkled. "Every day, the earth says only one thing over and over." "And what's that?" He leaned closer as if sharing a secret. That we have never been separate. The words settled between them like dust in sunlight. Thaleia broke the silence softly. Grandfather says that too, she said. When he carves the lamps, he says the wood still remembers the tree. Exactly, Dion replied. Nothing truly ends. It only changes form. He reached toward the oil dish, dipping a finger into the liquid. This oil once was fruit, once was sunlight, once was soil. And now it burns. He touched his finger to the fire, and the flame leapt briefly, bright as gold. Light, he said softly. That is the nature of transformation. Lysander watched the flame, mesmerized. And what of us? He asked. Are we transformed too? Dion's gaze met his. Every breath, he said, every thought, every kindness, every grief. The world presses us, and what we yield becomes our light. Thaleia looked at Lysander, her expression soft. You see? Even the fire teaches. He smiled faintly, lowering his eyes. Then I suppose I've been burning for years. Dion laughed quietly. Ah, but perhaps now you know how to tend the flame. The rest of the morning passed in quiet reflection. Thaleia walked among the ruins, collecting sprigs of thyme and wildflowers, while Lysander spoke with Dion about the philosophies of the land, how even silence could be sacred, how peace was not the absence of struggle, but the presence of understanding. When it was time to leave, Dion placed a small clay lamp in Lysander's hands. It was plain, but beautiful, carved with a spiral that wound inward toward the center. This is for you, he said. The mark represents the journey inward. Remember, to see clearly, one must sometimes close the eyes. Lysander bowed, touched. I'll keep it safe, he said. Don't keep it, Dion replied. Use it. Light it when you forget. They descended the hill slowly, the air warm against their skin. The path shimmered under the noon light, dust rising with each step. Below them, the olive groves spread endlessly, their silvery crowns glinting like a sea of quiet thought. Thaleia walked beside him, her basket of herbs swinging gently from her arm. He likes you, she said. I'm not sure why, Lysander admitted. I only asked questions. That's why, she said simply. Most people talk. You listen. They stopped at a bend in the path where the land fell away into a view of the sea. The light danced across the water, brilliant and serene. Thaleia set her basket down and looked out toward the horizon. Do you ever wonder, she asked softly, if the gods still walk among us? Lysander followed her gaze. If they do, he said, they walk in silence. Thaleia smiled faintly. Then perhaps they're walking beside us now. The air shimmered around them, and for a moment the whole world seemed to still. The wind, the trees, the distant hum of the sea. It was as if the grove itself were listening. When they finally returned to the village, the day was already fading into gold. The villagers were gathered near the stream, washing tools, mending nets, tending to small fires. Life moved in its gentle rhythm, steady as the tide. Lysander paused at the edge of the grove, turning the small lamp over in his hands. The spiral carved into its surface caught the light, drawing his eye inward, deeper. He thought of Dion's words. To see clearly, one must sometimes close the eyes. That night, as he sat in his small room, he lit the lamp. The flame burned steady and low, its light warm and soft. Shadows played across the walls, forming shapes that seemed almost alive. Branches, waves, wings. He closed his eyes and listened. Outside, the grove murmured. Inside, the flame whispered, and somewhere between them he felt it. The quiet fire of knowing, the slow illumination of the heart. He smiled, realizing what Dion had meant all along. The philosopher's fire was not in the hearth, it was within. Chapter 6. The Olive and the Sea. The following day dawned with a quiet clarity, the kind that seemed to stretch endlessly across the horizon. The morning light poured through the olive branches in gentle gold streams, touching each leaf as though it were a prayer. Lysander had risen early, unable to sleep after the long hours of watching the lamp's flame burn in his room. Its glow had faded with the dawn, but something of it still lingered in him, a small, steady warmth that he could neither name nor ignore. When he stepped outside, the village was still half asleep. A dog barked somewhere in the distance, and a few thin trails of smoke rose from the chimneys. Beyond the rooftops he could see the faint shimmer of the sea, its color changing from gray to blue as the sun rose higher. Thaleia was already waiting by the grove, her hands folded before her, a faint smile softening her face. She wore the same simple linen dress as before, though her hair was unbound today, moving freely with the wind. "You're awake early," she said as he approached. "I couldn't rest," he admitted. "Something about last night still feels unfinished." She tilted her head slightly. "Then perhaps the sea will help you finish it." He followed her gaze. The path that wound beyond the grove led downward toward the coastline, where the olive trees thinned and the salt air grew stronger. "The sea?" he asked, surprised. Thaleia nodded. "Every few weeks we go there. The trees belong to the earth, but the sea reminds us of what cannot be held. The grove gives roots, the sea gives surrender." Her words struck him with quiet force. "And what will I find there?" "That depends on what you're willing to let go of," she said simply, then began walking. They followed the winding path in silence, the earth beneath their sandals warm and smooth. As they descended, the groves gave way to meadows filled with wildflowers, bright patches of violet and gold swaying in the breeze. The air grew heavier, richer with salt and sunlight. In the distance, the sea glimmered like a mirror, vast and unbroken. Lysander had seen the sea before, of course, from the harbors of Piraeus, where ships came and went with the restless urgency of men chasing fortune. But this was different. Here the sea did not roar. It breathed. When they reached the shore, the sand was pale and cool beneath their feet. The waves rolled in softly, folding and unfolding with rhythmic grace. A line of rocks stretched into the water, crusted with shells and seaweed, and farther out, the faint silhouette of an island lay half-veiled in mist. Thaleia set down the small pouch she carried and looked out over the horizon. "My mother used to bring me here," she said. "She said the sea was the grove's reflection, both endless, both full of memory." Lysander stood beside her, letting the wind move through his hair, the salt settling on his skin. "And what did you learn from it?" She smiled faintly. "That every wave forgets where it began, and that's what makes it free." She crouched near the shore and opened the pouch. Inside were a few olive leaves, still green and fragrant. She held one out to him. "We offer these to the sea," she said, "not to ask for anything, but to give thanks for what comes and what goes." Lysander took the leaf carefully, its surface smooth and cool between his fingers. "Even for what goes. Especially for what goes." They stepped closer to the water's edge. Thaleia knelt, placed her leaf on the surface, and watched it drift away. Lysander did the same, and for a moment they stood in silence, watching the leaves float together, small, delicate pieces of green against the vast expanse of blue. The tide drew them out gently, and Lysander felt something loosen within him. some quiet weight he hadn't realized he was carrying. "You see," Thaleia said softly, "the sea remembers too, but differently. It doesn't hold. It transforms." He turned to her, studying her face in the light. "You speak as though everything is alive." Her eyes met his, calm and unwavering. "Isn't it?" The breeze lifted her hair, and for a heartbeat, Lysander thought he could see the same rhythm in her movements as in the sea, the same give and return, the same quiet power. They walked along the shoreline, the waves brushing their feet. The day warmed, the sun high now, gilding the cliffs that rose beyond the cove. Gulls wheeled overhead, their cries echoing faintly through the air. Thaleia stopped near a tide pool, crouching to look at the shells that lay scattered inside, spirals and ridges, each one shaped by time and tide. "Do you see this?" she asked. "The sea carves its memory into everything it touches." Lysander knelt beside her, tracing one of the shells with his finger. "Even the smallest things bear its mark." "Just like us," she said softly. "We're shaped by what we touch and what we let go." They lingered there for a while, collecting small stones and bits of glass smoothed by the waves. Thaleia placed one translucent shard in his palm, pale green, shaped like a tear. "For remembrance," she said. "It once was sharp, but the sea made it kind." He turned the glass in his hand, watching the light pass through it. "Do you ever miss the things you've let go of?" She thought for a moment. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but missing is part of loving. If we never miss, we never truly hold." Her words stayed with him long after they began their walk back. The sea shimmered behind them, infinite and patient, as if it had been listening. When they returned to the grove, the afternoon was quiet. The air was thick with the scent of oil and sunlight, and the trees stood motionless in the heat. Thaleia led him to a shaded spot beneath one of the oldest olives. She spread a small cloth and brought out a loaf of bread, a handful of figs, and a flask of water. They ate in silence, the sound of cicadas rising softly around them. After a while, Lysander spoke. "You said the grove and the sea are reflections. What do you mean by that?" Thaleia tore off a piece of bread and dipped it in oil. "The grove roots us in what is," she said. "The sea reminds us of what cannot be held. Between them, we learn how to live, grounded but free." He smiled faintly. "Grounded but free. That sounds like something Dion would say." She laughed quietly. He probably did. "I grew up listening to his lessons, though I understood them only when I began to feel them." Lysander leaned back against the tree, gazing at the dappled sunlight above. "You make it sound easy." "It isn't," she said. "To live like the grove, to give without fear, to endure without bitterness, that takes time. And to live like the sea, to release without regret, that takes courage." He looked at her, thoughtful. "And you?" "Which are you?" Thaleia smiled. "Both, I hope. Some days I root, some days I flow." Her voice was light, but there was a depth beneath it, a quiet strength born of knowing both stillness and motion. The hours drifted, the shadows lengthened, and the sky began to deepen to gold. From somewhere beyond the grove came the faint melody of a flute, a shepherd's tune, slow and wistful. The music wound through the trees like a thread, binding earth and sky together. Thaleia rose, brushing the crumbs from her dress. "Come," she said. "There's something I want to show you before the light fades." They walked again toward the edge of the grove, where the land sloped gently toward the sea. The view opened wide, a canvas of gold and blue. The sun hung low, casting the world in a glow so soft it seemed to melt the boundaries between things. "This," Thaleia said, gesturing toward the horizon, is what we call the meeting place, where the olive and the sea become one. Lysander stood beside her, watching the light shimmer over the waves. It feels like the world is breathing. It is, she said quietly. The trees exhale, the sea inhales. That's how balance is kept. He turned toward her. Do you ever wonder what happens when the balance is lost? She looked at him for a long moment before answering. Then the world reminds us, with drought or storm or silence, until we remember how to listen again. They stood there as the sun dipped lower, the sky shifting from gold to rose, from rose to deep indigo. The sea mirrored the colors, soft and endless. Thaleia's hair caught the last of the light, glowing like molten bronze. Lysander found himself watching her, not out of thought, but of quiet recognition. The same kind he had felt before, standing beside the olive press, or in the circle of lamps. The world seemed to fold inward around them, the air heavy with warmth and silence. Thaleia turned, her gaze meeting his. You'll be leaving soon, she said gently. He nodded. Tomorrow. Then take this with you. She reached into her basket and pulled out a small vial filled with pale green oil. From the first press. For light when you forget. He accepted it, his voice low. I don't think I'll forget. She smiled softly. Everyone forgets. That's why we keep lamps. He wanted to say something more, to tell her what her presence had awakened in him, how the grove had reshaped his understanding of peace, how Athens now seemed distant and hollow compared to this quiet, living wisdom. But the words stayed behind his ribs, too alive for speech. Instead, he simply bowed his head. Thank you, he said. Thaleia looked toward the sea one last time. The grove will remember you, she said, and the sea will carry your name. They stood together as the first stars appeared, their reflections trembling in the water below. The sound of waves reached them, soft and rhythmic, like breath, like prayer. The horizon faded into night, but the grove glowed faintly in the starlight, each leaf catching a hint of silver. The olive and the sea, rooted and free, seemed to whisper in one voice. Lysander closed his eyes, feeling the pulse of it. A rhythm older than words, deeper than thought. When he opened them again, the world was quiet, infinite, alive. And somewhere between the grove and the sea, between memory and forgetting, he finally understood what Thaleia had been teaching all along. Peace is not found, it is remembered. Chapter 7. The Departure. The morning came like a held breath. A faint silver mist veiled the hills, and the grove lay still, its branches unmoving, as if the trees themselves waited for something they did not wish to arrive. The air was cool, carrying the scent of the sea and crushed grass. Lysander stood at the window of his small room, watching the horizon shift from gray to gold. The lamp Thaleia had given him burned faintly on the table beside his notes. Its small flame flickered, fragile but steady. He had kept it lit all night, unwilling to let the darkness have the final word. His belongings were few: a rolled cloak, a satchel of parchment, the vial of olive oil, and the wooden lamp Dion had carved. He packed them slowly, not because there was much to do, but because he was reluctant to mark the end of anything. Outside, the first sounds of morning began to stir. A rooster calling from the distance, the clatter of clay jars, the murmur of women fetching water from the stream. Life, constant and ordinary. Yet this morning, even the ordinary felt sacred. When he stepped outside, the world seemed washed clean. Dew sparkled on the leaves. Sunlight filtered through the olive branches in threads of gold. Every sound, every movement carried the soft finality of farewell. Thaleia was waiting where the path began, her shawl wrapped loosely around her shoulders. The expression on her face was calm, but her eyes, clear and quiet, held something unspoken. "You're leaving early," she said. "The road is long," he replied, though they both knew that wasn't the reason. She studied him for a moment, then smiled faintly. "The grove will miss your questions. And I," he said softly, "will miss its answers." For a moment neither spoke. A breeze moved between them, stirring the leaves. Somewhere a dove cooed. The world felt suspended, poised on the edge of memory. Thaleia broke the silence. "Come," she said, "one last walk." They followed the path that wound through the heart of the grove. The morning light fell through the branches in long, slanted rays, touching the ground in pale gold. The air smelled of oil and soil and something faintly sweet, the scent of ripening fruit. Lysander's footsteps were slow, as if the earth itself asked him to linger. He glanced at Thaleia, who moved beside him with her usual quiet grace. "Do you ever grow tired of it?" he asked. "The same trees, the same work, the same hills?" She shook her head gently. "Never, because they're never the same. The trees change, the earth shifts, even the wind speaks differently each season. Only when you stop listening does the world repeat itself." He thought about that, the truth of it settling into him like sunlight warming stone. "Athens feels further away than I thought it would," he said after a while. Thaleia smiled faintly. "Then perhaps it was never as close as you believed." They reached the clearing where the first olive press stood. The basin was empty now, the stone dry and clean. Only the faint scent of oil lingered in the air. Thaleia ran her fingers along the edge of the stone as if in blessing. "It's strange," Lysander said quietly. "When I first came here, this place felt foreign. Now it feels like memory. Something I've known before, though I can't say when." "That's how truth feels," she said. "Familiar." He looked at her, trying to memorize every detail. The curve of her braid, the way her shawl caught the wind, the golden light resting on her skin. "I'll write about this," he said finally. "Not as study, but as remembering." Thaleia turned to him, smiling softly. "Then write with your heart, not your ink. The grove will know the difference." As they continued toward the edge of the valley, the sound of the sea began to rise, soft, steady, endless. It carried with it the rhythm of something larger than time itself. Thaleia paused by the stream where they had first met. The water glimmered under the sun, its surface smooth as glass. She knelt and cupped her hands, drinking deeply before standing again. "Water," she said quietly. "It remembers everything it touches." Lysander watched her. "Then it will remember us." "It already does," she said, and the simplicity of her tone made him believe her. They walked in silence for a long time, until the grove thinned and the path opened toward the sea. The horizon was wide and luminous. A soft wind moved through the olive trees, carrying with it the scent of salt and sunlight. Thaleia stopped, turning to face him. "This is where we say goodbye," she said. He nodded, unable to find words. She reached into her pouch and drew out a single olive leaf, its color a deep living green. She pressed it into his palm. "For remembrance," she said. "When the city feels too loud, hold this, and you'll hear the quiet again." He closed his hand around it. "And you?" he asked. "How will you remember?" Thaleia's gaze softened. "The trees will tell me," she said. "They always do." The breeze caught her hair, lifting a few strands across her face. Lysander wanted to reach out, to tuck them back, to hold that moment still. But he didn't. Some things were not meant to be captured. Instead, he said, "Thank you." "For what?" for reminding me that the world is still alive." She smiled faintly. "It always was. You just needed to slow down enough to feel it." They stood for a while in silence, listening to the sea. A gull passed overhead, its wings bright against the morning sky. The world seemed vast and intimate all at once. Then Thaleia stepped back. "Go now," she said softly. "The road is waiting." Lysander hesitated. "Will I see you again?" Thaleia looked toward the grove. "If the wind carries your heart back here, yes. But even if you don't return, the grove will still whisper your name." He nodded, the lump in his throat making speech impossible. She turned to go, walking slowly back into the grove. The light moved through the trees, wrapping her in gold until she seemed to dissolve into it, a part of the grove itself, eternal and unbound. Lysander watched until she vanished completely, then turned toward the sea. The road stretched ahead, long and pale against the hills. He walked without haste, each step carrying the weight of memory and the lightness of understanding. The world seemed to breathe differently now, deeper, quieter. At a bend in the path, he paused to look back. From this distance, the grove was a silver-green shimmer against the valley, and beyond it, the faint smoke of the village rising into the blue. He could almost hear the echo of voices, the rhythm of the press, the laughter beneath the fig trees. He reached into his satchel and took out the lamp Thaleia had given him. Its flame still burned, small but sure. He smiled, realizing he would never again need to borrow another's light, not while his own could still be kindled. The air grew warmer as he descended toward the coast. The sea spread wide before him, endless and alive. Its waves caught the sunlight, throwing it back in fragments of gold. He reached the shore just as the day ripened into full brightness. Sitting on a smooth rock, he placed the lamp beside him and uncorked the small vial of oil. He poured a single drop into the water and watched as it spread, a delicate sheen across the surface, catching the light like molten glass. "For you," he whispered, though he did not know if he meant Thaleia, the grove, or the world itself. Perhaps all three. The oil shimmered briefly, then disappeared, folded into the sea's vastness. He sat there for a long while, listening to the waves. The rhythm reminded him of her voice, the way she had spoken about the balance between holding and letting go. Finally, he rose. The road to Athens waited beyond the cliffs, winding through olive and stone, memory and time. As he walked, the wind carried the scent of the grove behind him, the soft fragrance of oil, earth, and morning light. It mingled with the salt of the sea until he could no longer tell them apart. He realized then that Thaleia had been right all along. The grove and the sea were not opposites. They were the same truth, spoken in two languages, one rooted, one free. And as he moved toward the horizon, the lamp's light steady in his hand, he understood that the journey home was not a return to where he had been, but a return to himself. That evening, far from the valley, Lysander reached the first ridge that overlooked the plains. He stopped to rest beneath a solitary olive tree, young, slender, its leaves silver in the twilight. He set the lamp on the ground beside it and watched its flame flicker. The wind whispered through the branches, and for an instant he thought he heard her voice. The light is not only in the flame, it's in what it touches. He smiled, closing his eyes. The breeze brushed his face like a farewell and a promise. When he opened them again, the first star had appeared, bright and unwavering. He lifted the lamp, took one last look toward the horizon where grove and sea met, and began to walk again. The path glowed faintly before him, golden with memory. And the world, vast, tender, eternal, breathed in quiet harmony once more. Chapter 8. The Scroll of Remembering. The city was loud. It greeted Lysander not with warmth, but with motion, the kind that never rested. Wheels clattered against stone, Voices echoed in the narrow streets, merchants called to one another, and the air shimmered with dust and heat. The rhythm of Athens was sharp again, relentless, unyielding. He had forgotten how noise could feel like hunger. The olive groves had been left behind, but their stillness followed him. It lived in the way he walked, in the slowness of his breath, in the way he saw light as something alive. Every face he passed reminded him that the world rushed past itself, never stopping long enough to listen. He made his way through the crowded agora, past marble statues, past the philosophers who gathered beneath the stoa to argue about virtue and truth, past the boys carrying scrolls and water jugs. Once, this had been his world. Now it felt like a story written in a language he no longer spoke. At the steps of his small stone house, Lysander paused. The door was just as he had left it, the bronze latch tarnished by salt air and time. When he entered, the room greeted him with silence, dust motes spinning lazily through a shaft of sunlight, parchment stacked neatly on the table, a clay jug half empty beside it. Everything was as it had been, and yet nothing was. He set down his satchel, unrolled his cloak, and placed the small wooden lamp, the one Dion had carved, at the center of the table. Its spiral engraving caught the light. He touched it gently, then poured a drop of oil from Thaleia's vial into it. The scent rose, rich, green, alive. When he lit the wick, the flame burned with a soft golden hue, steady and calm. The room seemed to change at once. The light made the air breathe again. Shadows softened, corners warmed. It was as if the grove itself had entered his home. Lysander sat down and unrolled a fresh piece of parchment. The stylus felt heavier than he remembered. He stared at the blank surface for a long time, listening to the quiet crackle of the lamp. Then, slowly, he began to write. The first words came hesitantly, like the first drops of rain on dry earth. But once they came, they did not stop. He wrote of the grove, of the morning mist and the silver leaves, of the hum of bees and the low murmur of the press. He wrote of Thaleia and her voice, soft as wind over water. He wrote of the lamp that never went out, of Dion's fire, of the sea that taught him how to let go. But more than that, he wrote of the silence. The kind that lived between words, between breaths, between moments. He wrote until the light outside his window began to fade, until the city's noise became a distant hum. His fingers were stained with ink, and his heart felt both heavy and clean. When he finally stopped, he sat back, staring at the half-filled parchment. The lamp's flame swayed slightly, as though acknowledging his effort. He whispered to it, half smiling. "You see," I remembered. The flame steadied. That night, sleep did not come easily. He lay awake, the sounds of the city rising and falling around him, footsteps in the street below, a dog barking, laughter from a nearby tavern. But beneath all of it, he could still hear the rhythm of the grove, the wind moving through the trees, the creak of the olive press, Thaleia's voice. The light is not only in the flame, it's in what it touches. He turned toward the lamp on his table. Its glow washed the room in gold. For the first time he realized it wasn't just a symbol, it was alive. Not because of the fire itself, but because of what it reminded him to be. He rose, walked to the table, and dipped his stylus once more. On the margin of the parchment he wrote, "Peace is not an absence. It is the presence that remains when everything else has fallen silent." In the days that followed, Lysander began to walk the city again, not as he had before, but differently. He still visited the agora, but he did not join the debates. Instead, he listened. He stood among the crowds and watched the flow of life. He saw how each man hurried to speak, how each woman carried baskets heavier than her years. how every child's laughter was swallowed by the city's hunger for sound. He began to see Athens as a kind of press, not of olives, but of lives. It too squeezed, crushed, demanded. Yet perhaps, he thought, what it produced was also oil, the essence of what remained after struggle. And so he started teaching again. But this time he did not lecture about logic or rhetoric. He spoke of rhythm, of breath, of listening. His students, young men eager for fame and argument, found his lessons strange. He would have them sit in silence for long moments until they grew restless. Then he would say quietly, "Do you hear the city?" They would nod. "Good," he'd continue. "Now listen beneath it. The silence that holds the sound, that is where wisdom begins. Some left after the first day, but others stayed." He began calling these gatherings Symposium of Stillness, a name that made the others laugh at first, but over time, even the laughter softened. People began to linger after his teachings, drawn not by the promise of knowledge, but by the feeling that something within them had grown quieter. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, a visitor came to his door. It was a messenger from the coast, a young boy carrying a small parcel wrapped in linen. "From the village by the sea," he said. "A woman asked me to bring it." Lysander's heart quickened. He thanked the boy, gave him a coin, and unwrapped the parcel. Inside lay an olive branch, its leaves dry but still fragrant, and a small piece of parchment. He unfolded it. The handwriting was simple, steady. "The trees remember you. The sea carries your name. The lamp burns each morning. All is well." There was no signature, but he didn't need one. He placed the branch on his table beside the lamp. For a long time he said nothing. Then quietly he whispered into the stillness, "And I remember you." The flame wavered, then steadied again, glowing brighter than before. As months passed, Lysander's writings began to spread. They were not like other scrolls, not full of arguments or definitions, but reflections written in a language that felt like water and light. He wrote about the living wisdom of the earth, about patience, about surrender. He called his collection the Scroll of Remembering. People said his words brought peace to those who read them, though Lysander always smiled and said, "It's not my words, it's the silence between them that heals." He grew older. His hair silvered like the leaves of the grove, and his hands bore the marks of both ink and time. But his eyes, calm, luminous, carried the same light he had seen in Thaleia's that first morning among the trees. Each evening he would light the same lamp. Each dawn he would watch its flame fade into sunlight. And every time he felt the same quiet gratitude, not for what he had found, but for what he had remembered. Years later, when he could no longer write, he asked one of his students, a gentle young woman who reminded him of Thaleia, to tend the lamp and read his words aloud. She did so faithfully, her voice soft, carrying through the small courtyard where the olive trees he had planted now grew tall. Their leaves shimmered in the afternoon light, whispering the same sound he had once heard in the grove far away. On his final morning, Lysander sat beneath those trees. The lamp burned beside him, steady as always. The air smelled of oil and earth and the faint salt of the sea wind that drifted from beyond the hills. He closed his eyes and listened. He could hear everything: the laughter of children from the street, the rustle of the trees, the murmur of the lamp's flame, and beneath it all, the vast, tender stillness that had followed him since the day he left the grove. He smiled. "It never left me," he whispered. "The peace, the remembering." When the flame finally went out, it was not because it had burned away, but because it had joined the sunlight. And somewhere beyond the hills, in a valley of silver leaves and golden mornings, Thaleia looked up from her work and felt the wind shift. She did not speak. She only smiled, knowing that another flame had returned to the grove. And so the story was written, not on parchment, not in ink, but in light. The grove endured, the sea breathed, and the world, patient, rooted, eternal, remembered. Chapter 9. The grove remembers. The years passed softly, like wind moving through the leaves. Seasons folded into one another. The rains came, the earth breathed, the olives ripened and fell, and the rhythm of the grove continued, steady as a heartbeat. The trees grew taller, their roots deepened into the soil, and though the world beyond changed, empires rising and falling like waves, the grove remained. Thaleia had grown older, though she wore her years lightly. Her hair, once dark as midnight, was now streaked with silver, and her eyes carried the gentle brightness of someone who had learned the language of stillness. She no longer worked the press herself. Younger hands now turned the great stone. But she still came each morning to walk among the trees, touching their trunks as one might greet old friends. Every year, on the first press, she still lit the lamp of memory. The flame burned as it always had, soft, golden, unwavering. But now, when she lit it, she spoke no words aloud. The prayer lived in her breath, in her gaze, in the quiet knowing that the light did not need asking to remember. And though the years had carried Lysander away long ago, she sometimes felt as if he still walked beside her, not as a ghost, but as presence. A part of the grove, the way sunlight is part of air. The villagers still spoke of the Athenian scribe who had once come to write of their harvests. His name had faded from memory, but his scrolls had not. They had travelled far beyond the valley, carried by merchants, copied by students, whispered by travellers who sought wisdom not in temples or courts, but in silence. Thaleia had never read them. She did not need to. She already knew what they said. One autumn morning, when the first cool winds began to stir, she walked to the top of the hill, the same one where she and Lysander had once brought the lamp to return the flame. The path was steeper now, and she paused often to rest, her hand brushing the rough bark of the trees for balance. When she reached the summit, the view opened before her, the grove stretching below like a sea of silver and green, the horizon melting into the blue of the Aegean. The air smelled of salt and ripe fruit, and the light was gentle, golden, alive. She sat at the base of the ancient olive, the one whose roots curled from the earth like a hand holding the world in place. Its trunk was thick and gnarled, its bark etched with centuries of wind and time. She leaned against it, breathing deeply. "I've come back as I promised," she whispered. The leaves trembled slightly in the breeze, answering in their soft, wordless language. She closed her eyes. In the silence, memories unfolded. The press at dawn, the laughter of the villagers, the lamp glowing in the grove, and Lysander's voice, curious, searching, gentle. She remembered the way he had looked at the oil's surface, as if he could see not just his reflection, but the truth beneath it. She remembered how he had listened, not merely to her words, but to the spaces between them, and she remembered the last morning when he had left. The way the air had held its breath until he disappeared down the path. The way she had whispered to the trees, "May he remember what the world forgets." She stayed there for a long while, the sun climbing higher. After some time, she noticed footsteps on the path below, slow, careful steps. When she looked up, she saw a young woman approaching, her face shaded by a linen veil. "Thaleia," the woman called softly. "The villagers said I would find you here." The voice was warm, melodic. When the young woman drew closer, Thaleia saw that she carried a small satchel and a rolled parchment. "Forgive me," the girl said, bowing slightly. "My name is Ione. I've come from Athens." Thaleia's eyes brightened. "From Athens?" Yes, Ione said. I'm a student of Lysander. He taught my teacher many years ago. His writings, they've reached far beyond the city. There are schools now that study them. He called them the Scrolls of Remembering. Thaleia smiled faintly. That sounds like him. The girl nodded eagerly. He wrote about this place, the grove, the sea, the lamp. About a woman who taught him what silence meant. I came to see it for myself. Thaleia said nothing for a moment. Then she gestured to the space beside her. Sit. The young woman obeyed. They sat together under the shade of the great tree, the air around them filled with the hum of bees. After a pause, Ione unrolled the parchment. This is one of his last writings, she said. It was found after he passed. She smoothed it across her lap and began to read aloud. There is a place where the olive and the sea meet, where the earth roots and the water freeze. In that place I learned that wisdom does not belong to those who seek to define it, but to those who are willing to dissolve within it. The grove remembers what we forget, that every ending is a beginning spoken in another tongue. Her voice faltered slightly and she glanced up. Thaleia's eyes were shining. Go on, Thaleia whispered. Ione continued. The woman who tended the trees taught me that peace is not something found, but something returned to. She never claimed to be wise, yet she carried the stillness of the world within her hands. I do not know if she will remember me, but I know the grove will, for it is made of the same silence we once shared. The words lingered in the air long after she finished reading. Even the wind seemed to pause. Thaleia reached out and touched the parchment gently. He remembered, she said quietly. Yes, Ione said, he remembered everything. The two women sat in silence. The world around them felt endless and close all at once. Finally, Thaleia spoke. Do you know why the olive tree is sacred? Ione shook her head. Because it endures, Thaleia said. Fire cannot destroy it. Even when it burns, its roots hold the memory of life. And when the rains come, it grows again. The young woman nodded thoughtfully. Like memory. Like love, Thaleia said. The girl smiled softly. He wrote about that too. Thaleia turned toward her, curious. Ione unrolled another small piece of parchment and read, Love is not possession. It is the space in which another's light teaches you how to see your own. Thaleia's breath caught. For a moment she could almost hear his voice again. Quiet, warm, carrying the rhythm of the sea. She smiled through her tears. He understood. The girl looked at her gently. He said he owed everything to you. Thaleia shook her head. No. He owed it to the grove, to the stillness, to the light that remembers us when we forget ourselves. The sun had begun to set, turning the world to amber and rose. The grove shimmered with its soft glow, every leaf catching fire in the dying light. Thaleia rose slowly. Come, she said. There's something you should see. They descended the hill, walking through the whispering branches until they reached the clearing where the ancient press stood. The villagers had finished their day's work, and the air was quiet, except for the creak of wood settling. At the center of the clearing stood the lamp of memory, burning faintly. Thaleia approached it and knelt, touching the base. This is the same flame, she said. It's been kept alive since the first tree was planted. When one generation ends, the next carries it forward. Ione knelt beside her, watching the flame. It's beautiful, she whispered. Thalia nodded. It's more than light. It's a reminder. Each drop of oil that feeds it comes from the same trees that fed our ancestors. When we light it, we remember not who we are, but what we are, the living breath of the world. They stayed there as the sky deepened into indigo. The first stars appeared, mirrored faintly in the oil's surface. The air was cool now, the scent of pressed fruit and earth mingling with the night. At last, Thaleia turned to Ione. "When you go back to Athens," she said softly, "take this." She reached into her pouch and handed the young woman a small vial of fresh oil. "From the first press. Light it when you forget. It will bring you home, wherever you are." Ione accepted it reverently. "Thank you," she said. Thaleia smiled. "No, child. Thank the trees." When the girl departed the next morning, Thaleia walked once more through the grove alone. The air shimmered with light. Birds moved lazily from branch to branch. Every leaf seemed to hum with quiet joy. She reached the place where the grove met the sea, the meeting of olive and horizon, and stood there, breathing deeply. The waves rolled in slowly, folding upon themselves, whispering their endless refrain. She picked up a single olive leaf and held it between her fingers. "For remembrance," she said, echoing the words from long ago. Then she let it go. The wind caught it, lifting it toward the water, where it floated for a moment before vanishing into the blue. Thaleia watched until it disappeared, her eyes reflecting both the sea and the sky. Then she smiled, not with sadness but with peace. She turned back toward the grove, her steps slow and sure. The trees rustled as she passed, as if greeting her. Somewhere in the distance the lamp still burned, and as night fell its glow spread through the valley like a heartbeat, gentle, golden, eternal.